All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Rare on the Road Rare Disease Leadership webinar. My name is Kanoy Flores, and I am the Senior Event Coordinator for Global Genes and your host for today's event. We're so happy you're here and excited to get started. As a collaboration between the EveryLife Foundation and Global Genes, two leading rare disease organizations who bring expertise in advocacy and legislation, this webinar aims to provide you with the tools and next steps to move you, your loved one, or your foundation forward on your advocacy journey. To start things off, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors who, because of their generosity, made all of this possible. I'd also like to thank our 2021 partners who helped us get the word out about this year's event. Thank you both so much. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you can get the most out of your time with us here today. Spanish translation services are available for today's webinar. To access the live English to Spanish translations, click on the link posted in the chat box located on your control bar. A new web browser window will open where you can select Spanish as your chosen language for captioning. If at any point during the webinar you have a question for our speakers, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box also located on your control bar below. There will be 2 Q&A sessions during this webinar, and we will hold all questions until then. If for any reason we are unable to get to your question, we will do our best to provide you with an answer via email after the event. I want to emphasize that this webinar is for you. We want to know your questions, want to hear your feedback, and we want to make sure you feel as prepared as possible to take the next steps. So please take a moment to answer the question on your screen and let us know in one word, why are you attending today's webinar? You can respond at the link posted in the chat box and on the screen at pollev.com/raretour201. or by texting Rare Tour 201 to 22333. So once again, that link is pollev.com/raretour201. Go ahead and just put in one word on why you're attending today's webinar. So looks like right now we have care and advocacy. See some other reasons. Oh, I see in the chat box, we have learning, here to have more knowledge for the speakers, education, advocacy looks like to be a big one. In the chat box, we have passion, determined. This is great. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Throughout the webinar, you can expect to see more questions and polls just like this. So thank you all for answering the questions. Lastly, we hope you'll use the chat function located on your control bar to talk and network with other webinar attendees. To do so, click the chat button and select to send your message to all panelists and attendees. This chat box is simply for discussion, so please refrain from adding your questions here. Any questions typed here will not be answered, so please make sure to type all questions within the Q&A box. If you'd like to give it a try right now, please open the chat box and type in your name and where you're viewing from. Let's see. Oh, we still have people for our last question. Oh, so we have people from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Philadelphia, Las Vegas. So amazing. We have everyone from all around the States. That's awesome. So great. The chat box is working well, and I hope you enjoy networking with your fellow attendees throughout the webinar. Also, today's webinar is being recorded, so if for any reason you have to step away or take an extra break, don't worry. We'll send you an email after the event with instructions for accessing the recording. With that, it's time to hit the road. Today, we'll start with an introduction of each organization, followed by tips for telling your story and building capacity. After, we'll shift to learning about policy issues and how they impact you, and then we'll close the day with information on next steps you can take in your own rare journey. So to get things started, I would first like to introduce you to Brenda Colmenares, the EveryLife Foundation's Communications Manager, who will tell you a bit more about her organization.
Thanks so much, Kanoi. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here and to tell you a little bit about the EveryLife Foundation and a little bit about me too. Next slide, please. So everything started about 3 years ago when I was first diagnosed with a rare disease called Myasthenia Gravis. At the time, I had no idea what myasthenia or what a rare disease really was. This autoimmune disease causes muscle weakness, which made it hard for me to swallow, and it caused really bad double vision, which was definitely scary and isolating. But my slight addiction to social media kind of saved my life. I started searching and finding groups of people who felt similar or exactly like me, and was surprised to find an entire community who had questions, who needed help, and who wanted to share their stories to help others or just to feel less alone. So that's when I learned the power of advocating and sharing stories. And in the EveryLife Foundation, I have the opportunity to help communicate the rare disease community's needs. Next slide, please. But before we go on, I'd just like to know what you think the EveryLife Foundation actually does. So you can go ahead and select your response if you think it's A, activates a patient advocate, B, convenes patient organizations, C, empowers a rare disease community, D, advances policy to save lives, or all of the above. Wow, great job, everybody. You're all correct. We actually do all of the above. And C, you're actually correct too. So let me tell you a little bit about this. Next slide, please. So just as a quick overview, the EveryLife Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering the rare disease patient community to advocate for impactful science-driven legislation and policy that advances the development of and access to life-saving diagnosis, treatments, and cures. That sounds pretty simple, right? So let me tell you a bit about the EveryLife's top policy priorities and what we focus on. So number one, we focus on closing the innovation gap for the 93% of rare diseases that have no FDA-approved treatment. Number two, eliminate the diagnostic odyssey for rare disease patients. Number three, improve the regulatory process and advance regulatory science for rare disease therapies. Number four, ensure patient access to safe and efficacious therapies and cures at the earliest moment possible. And number five, empower patients to develop an impactful voice in policymaking, drug development, and regulatory decision-making. So this is just to help you understand the reason why we do what we do. Next slide, please. Two EveryLife events that help empower patients are Rare Across America and Rare Disease Week, which are hosted by the RDLA, a program of the EveryLife. And don't worry, you will hear a bit more of this in detail later in the presentation by some of our colleagues. In Rare Across America, advocates can share their rare disease stories with their members or Congress. Rare Disease Week was actually the first event I attended while being a part of the EveryLife. It was a full week of learning about legislative issues, and I got to meet other advocates. Actually, in that picture, that's me pretending not to have really bad double vision, but feeling super happy to have met Cheryl that day. She was actually the first person I had ever met with myasthenia, just as me. Next slide, please. Some of the EveryLife programs include the Rare Disease Congressional Caucus, which educates Congressional Caucus members about the community, Community Congress, where patient organizations and industry help develop solutions for the community, Rare Artists, which exhibits the unique gifts of individuals affected by rare disease through art, and Rare Is, a scholarship to help the community pursue their dreams. Next slide, please. Every program and initiative by the EveryLife has been created because of a need the community has vocalized, and one of them is the recently released National Economic Burden of Rare Disease study, which found that the estimated economic cost of 379 rare diseases reached nearly 1 trillion in the US last year. The newborn screening program legislative initiatives at the state and federal level, next slide please, and the STAT Act, which aims to improve the development of and access to therapies for the rare disease community. Next slide. With programs like Rare on the Road, we work to provide rare disease patients, caregivers, and advocates with tools and resources to drive change and make their voices heard. Just remember that we hear you and your voice matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda, for that great presentation. Now, please join me in welcoming Parvati Krishnan, Global Genes Foundation Alliance Manager, who will tell you a bit more about the organization.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here this morning with all of you. My name is Parvati Krishnan. I'm the Foundation Alliance Manager at Global Genes and a mom to 2 medically complex children with rare and ultra-rare conditions. Next slide, please. We will start my presentation with a quick poll. So how do you think Global Genes can better help you? So can we help you connect with support groups, researchers? Can we help you start your own foundation, provide funding opportunities? You tell us what you think we can, and hopefully I'll be explaining a little bit more about what we can do for you. Well, you guys are all nailing it. The good news is we do it all. We provide education. We provide help you tell your rare disease story better. We provide educational resources on our website. We also provide you with information on how to start your own foundation and how to connect with everyone else in the rare disease community. Next slide, please. We at Global Genes envision a globally connected community equipped to eliminate the challenges associated with rare diseases. We provide information for patients, caregivers, care partners, and patient advocacy organizations. We also connect researchers and industry, and we make sure that everyone is connected to solving all of the mysteries associated with rare diseases. Next slide, please. Our mission and our vision are all aligned in serving you. Global Genes provides hope for more than 400 million people affected by rare diseases around the globe. We fulfill our mission by helping patients find and build communities, gain access to information and resources, connect to researchers, clinicians, industry, government, and other stakeholders, share data and experiences, stand up and stand out, and become effective advocates on their own behalf. We do this through our programming, through our resources, and our amazing behind the scenes staff that work together to ensure we can be of help to you. Next slide, please. One of the new ways that we have found we can connect you all is through our Rare portal. This is our new community that we have created that we would love for all of you to join. It is a unique and safe community to help you connect with your peers. They can be other patients, they can be other organizations. This would be your community that we hope we can facilitate supporting you with. Next slide, please. Please check out our resource hub. We will also put the link in the chat. Our resource hub allows you to get information to share to your community. If you're a patient looking for information on how to be a better advocate, if you are looking to see how to start a 503c organization, you name it, you have it, and it's all there in our resource hub. In addition to all of the toolkits or educational booklets, like I like to call it, we also have many videos from amazing speakers that we have curated on our website that I hope you will all reach out to. If there's something missing there, you are always welcome to reach out to us and let us know. We would love to collaborate with you and create an educational toolkit that would be helping our patients and our community at large. Next slide, please. Amongst many other educational materials, some of our most recent and outcomes, resources, and publications are now on our website. We are especially proud to share with you our Diversity of Odysseys Diagnostic Challenges Report, our annual impact report that is absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't read it, please go read it today. It has so much information about the landscape of rare disease. And our next report, we also have our grant report, program report from 2021 that explains about all of the grants and how we impacted the rare disease community at large. If you're an organization who have young adults living with a rare disease, or if you are a young adult yourself, please go check out the financial advocacy in rare disease. It is absolutely brilliant, and our team worked really hard behind the scenes to put together this guide that will help you navigate the financial issues that are around rare disease. Next slide, please. In addition to all of these educational resources that we have on our website, we also have some really exciting Global Genes events coming up that we are so proud about. Rare on the Road, which is today, is one of them, but we also have the state-specific events coming up in May. We're also looking forward to having you all at our Rare Drug Development Symposium. It's a 2-day interactive event that we partner with the Orphan Disease Center, and it focuses on educating both beginners and advanced participants on the drug development process. So if you are in this journey and you would like to learn more about this, we welcome you to be a part of that. Our Patient Advocacy Summit is one of our largest events that we put together for patients and caregivers and organizations and advocates, and it is one of our largest events that we are so proud of to see you all, and we hope to see you all this year in some form, and we are looking forward to putting that together. So if you are a patient wanting to connect with other patients, or if you're an advocacy organization looking into learning more, please do attend our Advocacy Summit. Next slide, please. And lastly, as a Foundation Alliance manager, I would not be doing my part if I don't encourage all of you. If you're a patient advocacy organization, please join our alliance today. It is the core of Global Genes. It is what drives us to do more for the rare disease community at large. All of these links will be available to you in the chat, and we will also be putting it up later when we send the slides to you. Passing it on to two of my very favorite advocates, Danielle and Effie. Hanoi, back to you.
Thank you so much, Parvati. Next up, we have Daniel DeFabio, Associate Director of Community Engagement at Global Genes, joined by Once Upon a Gene podcast host and rare mom, Effie Parks, here to talk about how you can tell your rare story and build capacity. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, thanks, Kanoi. So I, like many people, began my rare disease lifestyle because my son was diagnosed with Menkes syndrome. And as Brenda mentioned earlier, you seek out others. And one of the ways you find them is because they have shared their story. And it took me a few years. Lucas got his diagnosis in 2009, but by 2015, I felt I was ready to share his story and my story. And that changed everything. The people you find, one of them being Effie Parks. I found her through her podcast and reached out, and that was just a little over a year ago. Now she's one of my close friends and collaborators, and she's good enough to let me co-host the television version of her podcast, Once Upon a Gene, with her. So all of these things are outgrowths of storytelling, sharing your rare disease experience. And I'm going to get into the why and how of that. But I think next slide, please. I think first we want to see where people are at in terms of, have they been telling their story already? So if you could just respond if any of these apply to you. Maybe you have not shared your story at all, or maybe you've done it through one of these different media types. And I want to say that, of course, for some people, sharing their story, that's not what they want to do. They want to be private in their experience, and that's entirely valid. But we're going to explore, for those who do want to, what can help. So we're seeing a good spread of different media types that people have pursued. And I think something to consider is where your opportunities are. Do you have access to certain media more than others? Blogging probably is available to all of us. And each one can lead to the next. I think a lot of podcast hosts would want to see that you've been a blogger, or how can they know your story ahead of time before they put you live on the air to get your story. So this is great to see these results. I think we can move to the next slide, and I'll get into sort of the why and how. I think the why breaks into two parts for me. Why is the story something that benefits you if you share it, and why it might benefit others? And certainly when you share your own story, you, I think, are able to feel less alone. You will find people come to you, people gravitate to you because they found your story and they'll reach out. So that is an immediate, I hope, benefit to you having shared your story, but of course you're benefiting the audience too. They can learn from your experience. And I think many of us had to go through a bit of coming to terms that we might be an expert. We expected doctors to be experts, and doctors will turn to and say to you, no, actually in rare disease, you parents or you patients are the experts, or you will quickly become them. And so even with a little bit of experience, 1 year into your diagnosis or 2 years into your diagnosis, you'd be surprised how expert you are. And there are people that are coming up behind you that need to know what you know. There's a meme that goes around. It says, the story of how you overcame your challenge will serve as someone else's survival guide. So if for no other reason, share that story because somebody needs to hear it. And I mentioned how that putting that out there is either a beacon or a magnet that allows others to find you. And you never know the opportunities that come from that. My first time attending a Global Genes conference, I met Bo Bigelow, and together Bo and I discussed what our needs were and what we wanted to see happen in the space. And that led to us creating opportunities in the space, which was at first a rare disease film festival, and then later a streaming channel for rare diseases. But another reason to share your story, if you can, and be specific and be as revealing as you're comfortable with, people want to help you, your friends, your neighbors, your family, but they won't know how until you tell them. And we might take that for granted. Of course, can't they see I need help, getting up and down the stairs or whatever it is. But really, no, if you haven't spelled it out explicitly, you can't expect anyone to do it. And along those lines is, if someone is offering in general terms, how can I help? What can I do? It might be difficult for you in the time, in the moment, to come up with an actual tangible task for them. But if you've put it out there on your blog or in your podcast or whatever, maybe that becomes a shortcut for you and a shortcut for them to get to something like that. I know in our own experience, it was wonderful to have a neighbor down the street reach out and say, hey, could you guys come over for movie and popcorn at 3:30 tomorrow? And I thought 3:30 is the only time of day that works in our schedule. And then I complimented her on that amazing timing. And she just had a wink and a nod. And she said, I know, I read your blog. I knew that would work for you. So another thing is just the time saving it does for you is, maybe you can have the short version or the not so short version of your genetic disease story in a printout that you can bring with you to all your medical appointments. And a doctor isn't going to read 20 pages, but if it's 1 or 2 pages, they might. And that also sort of sets a little bit of what the relationship is going to be with a new doctor. You are clearly an informed person, and they can get to know you and get the details, and you don't have to remember every detail. And like, did I share that? Did I remember to report that? So it can be a time saver for you. We happened in our family to have the local hospital be a teaching hospital. And so a lot of medical students did rounds and would come, and they'd be very curious about this boy with a rare disease. And on some occasions, I would get tired of re-explaining Menkes syndrome to medical students over and over again. But I thought, what more could an advocate want than this teachable moment with the people that could have potentially the biggest impact? And then actually, in the last hospital stay we had, I had an experience like that talking to medical students about Menkes syndrome, and one of them said, "Oh, we know Menkes disease, and we know your son because he's become a case study in our coursework." And that nothing could have been more fulfilling, more fitting of a sort of life journey for my son and our time at that hospital. Next slide, please. Another aspect of the why do you want to tell the story? And that really boils down to, how are you going to end your story? Think of it as a call to action at the end. Are you going to ask people to donate funds? Are you going to ask them to work on a piece of legislation? Are you going to just ask them to share the story? And each of those things will shape why and how you're telling a story. What do you include? What do you not include? Knowing where you want to end up is a great way to make sure you're telling the right story and hitting the right notes, emphasizing the right things. This next point I learned from Effie Parks. Think about the moments of realization and transformation. If it was a great big aha moment or impact for you, it might be for others too. It could be something as simple as, I learned I couldn't manage my child without a Hoyer lift in the house, and I wish I had done so sooner. You know, something like that saved my back. Whatever it is that was a breakthrough for you is probably a good thing to share. On the flip side of that, there may be things that are just too private. Maybe the impacts on your relationship with your spouse, maybe that's too intimate. You don't want to share it, and you're totally within your rights to not share. This next one, I don't think people are thinking of as much. We all know that some of our stories are literally 1 in a million. From my film festival experience, I've seen 2 films come in named 1 in a million. So even though our rare stories are inherently unique, among rare stories, they are a little less unique. We have a very shared experience. While the symptoms may be unique, the lifestyle is very similar. So looking at your story and what is unique among the unique, right? You know, is it surprising to people that you ran across the country despite, you know, the limitations of your health? Those type of things. Obviously, we can get into inspiration that is maybe over the top. The next point actually gets to that. We can't all be the superstar. We hear about someone raising millions of dollars for the rare disease, and that's a fantastic story. But if it's not in your skill set, it can be a little off-putting. It can feel like, well, I can't, that's not the path for me. I can't do that story. So the next point is share your mess, not just the success, because those successes may keep people out of your experience. I can't run across the country, so that's out for me. But your struggles, your mess is more universal. That is what people are going to relate to. I got that point from a friend of mine who coaches TED Talks, and he says, everybody relates to the mess, not just the success. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, next up is my good friend, Effie Parks. So take it away, Effie.
Okay, am I on? Hi, thanks, Daniel. It's always so fun following you. My name is Effie Parks, and when I first found out that my son had a rare disease and that I was now a rare disease parent, it felt like most days were just about getting through and making it to the next one. I was lost. I felt like I was alone, and I was searching for something. Admitting to yourself that it's okay to feel lost and overwhelmed and alone and cheated and whatever else you're feeling is the first step to being okay. That's one part of why I advocate. That's why I podcast. And that's why I'm here today. I figured out what I needed to do to be okay and to thrive in my new world. That's why it's important for me to tell my story and maybe help some of you tell yours along the way. We were so excited to start a family, and we had all the grand ideas of what it would look like and who our child would be. When I had Ford and I heard him cry for the first time, it was so beautiful. Everything was perfect and I felt free. And that lasted for a couple hours and it quickly slipped away afterwards. The first sign we got of the path we would eventually be on came a few hours after that. My husband's dad came in and he asked, like most grandparents do, with the funny little quip, and he said, "Well, does he have all 10 fingers and 10 toes?" And we laughed. Of course he does. And Casey said, "We didn't actually check." And we saw this little teeny toe. Didn't have a nail or anything on it. It didn't even seem like it had a bone in there. And, we nervously laughed it off, and we kind of marked it as our first moment of uncertainty. And we had a small sense of dread, but it didn't mean anything, right? It was just a toe. And the doctors didn't seem to be worried. In fact, they didn't even notice it when they gave Ford his physical exam. Looking back on the delivery, I wish I would have known a few things. I wish I would have known about some red flags that I found later. Knowing that I could get my medical records, the behind the scenes ones, I wish I knew that kind of stuff before. Eventually, we brought him home and we could not feed our son. He would not swallow. He wouldn't latch. We tried everything, tubing, everything, in and out of the doctors a few times a week and with specialists trying to feed him. And ultimately he was admitted to the hospital at 4 months old with failure to thrive. We were told that he had a number of symptoms, including microcephaly, which would result in severe global developmental delay and a shortened lifespan. There was so much fear and what felt like zero guidance in those moments, in those first days. And I felt ashamed. I felt ashamed that I didn't understand what I should do and what I didn't know. And I felt completely abandoned when I was sent home with a feeding tube and a pamphlet for early intervention. Being in the car, it became commonplace. I have so many photos of Ford in the car. It strangely became a place I felt safe. I could be in my car and cry in peace with nobody watching. I wasn't managing the incessant beeping of the feeding tubes. I wasn't Googling symptoms. I didn't have to answer anyone's phone calls or text messages with questions that they kept asking me. It was just Ford and I in the calmness of the car, in between the stress of being home and the stress of being at the doctor's. I was going to and from appointments, and driving in that moment was my only job. It was years that it was like that. And I was starving for connection, for anyone who understood my day-to-day. I wanted to know if someone else had the same thoughts that were running through their head that I did. And I started searching for podcasts that were talking about the stuff that I wanted to talk about, whether it was like a CRISPR podcast that was way over my head, or a parent sharing their personal journey through a diagnosis. I found solidarity there. I found comfort. And it was the first time I felt like there was someone else out there that could truly connect with me again. And I had that aha moment. And I knew I just had to buckle in and get going. And somewhere along that way, my expectations ended and my calling began. Podcasts were a lifeline for me. I've always been a person who needs to connect on a soul-to-soul level. I crave human touch and connection. And I get that from hearing stories, from hearing someone's voice. Listening to them was the most direct way for members of that community to speak to me on my timeline and at my pace. I've always been genuinely curious and wondered what shaped people throughout their lives. And Like I said, I crave connection, and I feel more than any form of media or medium that podcasts facilitate that connection. It's intimate, it's passive. Something else I needed when I was scrambling, I needed the support when I had the moment and the time to receive it. I could press play and the story would always be there, just where I left off. But here's what I didn't really expect. That's why we as consumers listen, because of what we just talked about, but it's at least as valuable for me to be able to tell my story. Telling your story isn't just for the listener. It helps tend to our own wounds in the process. Time heals things, sure, but actively living through the things, recognizing your feelings, and making intentional decisions from them is liberating. It's growing, and it's undoubtedly healing. The more I tell my story and hear from others how it's resonated with them somehow, the more I find new pieces that I've been able to put in place of fear or shame or trauma or whatever it is. I see this patchwork that's being weaved together that's my own security blanket in some sense. It's a beautiful token of putting things back together and making it beautiful. And when I hear things in other stories that makes me think or makes me feel, it's magical. And by listening to others and learning to tell your own story, you find your voice. You find out how to communicate effectively with medical professionals, teachers, therapists. You become more of a person and less of an appointment. My podcast, Once Upon a Gene, is a place I created to give others that opportunity and that voice and that healing that comes with telling your story. There's practical benefits. I work to share resources as well as stories. You know, you can press the button and maybe find out what you should pack when you go to the hospital, or what type of therapy might work best, or learn about the daunting task of a special needs trust and guardianships. But the most important thing to me personally, by jumping into podcasting and telling my story, is that I created community, my community. I've forged bonds and connections with people whom I never would have met if I didn't start this. The two disabled dudes, they gave me hope that just because my son has a rare disease, that wasn't going to make him unhappy. And he could do great things like ride a bike across the United States of America. I learned about parents who are moving mountains through sheer force, like Amber Freed, Kim Nye, Mike Graglia, Nasha Fitter. I found a friend down the road, Jill Hawkins, who lives in my town, through the podcast. Daniel DeFabio and Bo Bigelow have been an extra special part. I found so much of their softness to be exactly like my husband's, and it helped me understand his journey as well. I've been so blessed to be included in their journey as a co-host for Once Upon a Gene TV on the Disorder channel with them, where we're able to give people another avenue on the subjects we tackle in Rare. That's what telling your story does. When you authentically and genuinely connect with people in your community, they stop being someone you talk to on the phone or interviewed, and they become more. The people in the rare disease community become your family and your go-tos. And with them, I have found more strength than I ever thought I would. When I started, I talked about whatever it takes to get through. That's what telling my story and hosting this podcast is. It's my way to not just live in survival mode, but to actually find ways to enjoy this process, remaining curious and learning as I go, and not feeling stuck and down. I encourage you to surround yourself with people who are going through the same journey. You can help each other along the way, and stories help us all learn and process and grow. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Effie and Daniel, for those great tips. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker who will share their own rare story. Luisa Leal, founder founded the Akari Foundation when her former partner's fraternal twins were diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Since the founding of the organization, Luisa has collaborated with other Duchenne organizations to expand the Akari Foundation's mission and help support families by providing access to information and support in their native language. Please welcome Luisa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luisa Leal. I'm the founder of the Akari Foundation. Everyone who knows me knows I'm not very comfortable in front of camera, but I thought it was very important for me to share my story. This organization I founded for my former partner, ex-boyfriend, kids. When I started doing research, when he told me the kids who had muscular dystrophy, I heard of the word before, muscular dystrophy, but I didn't know what Duchenne mean on that time. So I started doing a little research. I'm a very curious person. And then I started realizing that there was not that many information in Spanish. In my journey to understand the disease and how I was going to be able to help them going through all this, I realized that there was no information in our native language. The kid's mom, she's from Venezuela and she doesn't speak English. So I started translating for her a lot of the documents or some of the information I found, even though there's a lot of information in Spain. I'm from Mexico, she's from Venezuela. The translation sometimes doesn't mean the same, even though it's in Spanish. So I try to find a way to translate in like a general, like in general language, so we all can understand, because one word can mean something completely different when you translate, especially in the medical field. So I started doing translations, and then I noticed once I started going into workshops and start getting connected to other people that there was a need of this this service. I actually I was with the kids staff for 5 years. In those 5 years we broke up at the beginning, probably when I started the organization, and I decided to just let it go. You know, I was like, well, you know, I create this for them, and we're not gonna be together, so I'm not gonna do anything. So then 2 days later, I get a phone call from a mom crying, asking desperate for help. She said she found my information in Google, and she was living in my same town in San Antonio, and she needed help. And she said her kid was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, but she didn't know what kind of muscular dystrophy. Even though she went to different doctors, she spoke to different nurses, apparently speaking Spanish, but they couldn't explain her the what kind of muscular dystrophy her son had. So we actually met in my office, and once she gave me the paperwork that she had. I saw the paperwork, and on the very top of the paperwork, it says limb-girdle muscular dystrophy disease. And I said, it's right here on the top. And no one was able to explain her that, even though we're focusing in Duchenne, obviously it's part of muscular dystrophy. So I try to help her as much as I can and give her some information. She is actually now a good friend of mine. This was like 4 years ago when I started the organization. So I said, you know, regardless of a relationship, she is the reason I'm doing this. So now I have a commitment with all the families and all the kids, and I have met so many families that message me all the time, and we in touch. What I noticed that a lot of the Hispanic community, they try to communicate a lot through Facebook. So our focus is more on Facebook than on Twitter or Instagram. So I created a group, and that's where we post a lot of the translations we do. At the beginning, I was doing it myself. Now I have some help, but that's where we communicating. We are, next slide, please. I'm sorry. Yeah, so when we start doing this, we, like I said, we noticed that we had no support, no representation for the Hispanic community, the lack of information on Spanish, the lack of knowledge on what the immigrant community needs, the lack of support to the immigrant family and the Hispanic community. So I've been doing a lot of research on what we all need. Like I said, it doesn't matter that we all speak Spanish. Our needs are, the needs are basically the same, but I'm sorry, the language can be a little bit different. So we need to basically create something special for every little country. The idea was to help people in the United States. We do have several families that we have help in the United States, but we get a lot of requests from other countries. So we're trying to expand to be able to do it. So now with the pandemic, we decided to start doing webinars, and we've been able to reach a lot of those families as well. Next slide, please. When I came to this country, I was 19. I'm actually from Nuevo Laredo. It's the side, is the border with Laredo, Texas. So we're kind of like used to a lot of American style stuff because we're like in the border. But I moved to this country when I was pregnant of my oldest daughter. She's 25 now, and I was 19. She born here, and she born with a congenital anomaly in her right hand. Basically, she's missing fingers. So my idea was just to be here for a little while and then go back, but that made me kind of, I changed my plans. Basically, I was going to law school. My idea was to go back and finish law school, and then I just decided to stay here because they start doing a lot of tests and a lot of, to start going to therapy. So basically, she grew up going into the hospitals, you know. Then my 14 years later, I have another kid. She's 11, and she has this disease on her right eye. It's basically like 3 diseases in one that it can cause for her to lose her eyesight. So we spend a lot of times too a lot of time in hospital settings, you know. So next slide, please. So when I start seeing all this, you know, when I had my oldest daughter, and when I came to this country, I was illegal. I was illegal for 24 years. Yes, it took me that long to be able to get a work permit, then a green card. So, but when I was with both of my kids, I didn't have documents. So for me, it was very hard to ask for help, even though they were US citizens. I know how hard it is. I know it's not easy. And a lot of times I was scared to ask for help. So I have to jump loops and hoops to be able to help my kids with no insurance, and has to be, you know, have to be going to hospitals and appointments and all this stuff. Next slide, please. So that actually, after finding the boys had the muscular dystrophy, and then putting my story and their story in one, I actually had the vision of the Akari Foundation. So our mission is to educate, empower, and advocate for the Hispanic immigrant community and help with resources and education. But our vision is to create a holistic and educational advocacy center for the Hispanic immigrant and low-income families, regardless of the ability to pay. A lot of people hear the word holistic and get scared, you know, but I'm Mexican, so I'm more about the natural approach. I'm not saying no to medication. Of course, yes, we need medication, but we can help them to trying to push more the extra help for the mental I noticed that a lot of the families need a lot of mental help. You know, it's very hard when you have a kid with a rare disease. So I'm trying to push that a lot. And I've been trying in my own journey to healing. I've been trying to push more about, you know, be more with nature, read more, exercise, eat better. So I'm trying to do that with the therapy center as well. So next slide, please. So yeah, with the Akari Foundation, you're gonna be able to. We have a website. We have, like I said, we have more followers on social media because a lot of the Latino communities, Hispanic communities follow more Facebook. So we're trying to put more of our effort in there. Next slide, please. And this is some of the workshops that we have created. The one on the bottom with all the people that was in California, the one on the right, that's just the people who help put together an event in San Antonio in CRIT. CRIT is it's a clinic for kids with special needs in San Antonio, and some of the other webinars that we have done in Spanish. Actually, our effort is always going to be 100% in Spanish. We have a few webinars that we have English speakers, doctors, but we have translators, and we always going to try to find the information 100% in Spanish. That's our main goal. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Luisa. It's now time for a quick 10-minute break. This is a great time for you to use the restroom or grab a snack. We will resume the webinar at 12:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time or 9 a.m. Pacific Time with our first Q&A session. Please be sure to submit any questions you have for Daniel, Effie, and Luisa in the Q&A box. And as a reminder, any questions submitted to the chat box will not be answered. So please make sure to add those questions in the Q&A box. And during this break, please also enjoy a short alto saxophone interlude by Timothy Harmon, a rare advocate who you'll hear a little bit more from later on today. We'll see you all again shortly. Amazing. Thank you so much, Timothy, for that amazing saxophone performance. We have about 5 more minutes left in the breaks. We once again will continue at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. See you all again shortly. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a nice break, and thank you again, Timothy, for that wonderful music. I just wanted to point out that we currently have about 240 people tuned in right now, which is so great to see. Thank you all again for joining us here today. We are now going to get started with our first Q&A session with Daniel, Effie, and Luisa. If you are unable to enter your questions into the Q&A box during the break, you can still do so now. So right now I'm going to welcome back Daniel, Effie, and Luisa, and our Q&A moderator, Pam. Thank you again for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, Kanoi. Very happy to be with everybody. We have a lot of questions, so I'll get started right away. The first question is for Daniel. What is the best way to go about blogging? Do you have hosting sites that you would recommend that give good results?
It's tricky. A few years ago, I might have, 2015, I definitely would have said the Mighty, which is not to say it's no longer a good answer, but times do change, and I think people can create their personal blogs and be almost as effective, or Caring Bridge is less of a public blogging place. You can feel a little more confident that you're only reaching other concerned, rare disease people there. So I'm not sure I have a great answer. Creating your own blog is definitely worthwhile, but the challenge there is, how do you get it seen? And sometimes you want to leverage your post to a larger audience, and maybe Mommies of Miracles, or there are other sort of special needs parenting communities that might want to hear your rare disease experience as part of their platform. So I think step one is just blog anywhere, and then step two is try to leverage it up, try to find the next platform that can give you more visibility.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Effie, could you tell us perhaps how you would convince families, especially in an ultra rare community where there aren't many families, to share their stories if they're, maybe not comfortable stepping forward, or you don't have a lot of takers?
I have found that no matter what your diagnosis is in this world, that you can find connection with just about everyone, whether there's 2 kids with your diagnosis or 200. I feel like you can find so many similarities in other people's journey and their stories, that you can really confide in people who aren't in your little teeny N of 1. Reaching out to the people that are in that are obviously something that would be worthwhile probably, but just know that they're not the only people that are going to be able to answer your questions. A lot of the things that you'll deal with along the way, someone's already done. And I would never hesitate to break out of that little box, because there's a great big rare disease world, and they're just so genuine and giving, and there's a lot of really good information that they can bring to the table. You feel like you're alone on that tiny rock with 2 people who have diagnoses. There are also other families who only have kids, that are 2 in the world, maybe even connecting with them, families who have, diseases that have 1 diagnosis. That's another little community, sub-community. So I would just say open all the doors and let the air in as much as possible.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you, Effie. Luisa, maybe you can come off mute and tell us, do you know of any networks for undocumented people living in the United States?
Actually, I don't. You know what? I've been focusing so much on my own work that I haven't looked outside my network. I'm trying to grow my organization right now. I'm focusing on that to be able to bring more people to help me, because right now it's pretty much 2 or 3 people working, majority me, myself, and I. We're trying to grow. We're trying to find that information to make it our job a little more easier, maybe connected with other organizations that they want to work with us. We're always open to any collaboration with other organizations, definitely.
Great, great. I'm certain you're going to get some responses to that. So thank you for that.
They're welcome. They can email me, luisa@theakarifoundation.org, and or find me on social media. Thank you.
Great. Daniel, back to you. Excuse me. Have you been, if you have been sharing your story, videos, podcasts, doing pretty much everything you can, and you're ready to go to the next level and reach a broader audience at conferences, perhaps, maybe beyond your specific rare disease community. And, you know, if you have a message, how do you get to that next level?
That's a great question. And it's one that I wrestled with prior to starting my film festival. There is an established process for being a poster presenter at conferences that doesn't exactly lend itself to these patient stories, but I found you can sort of force it to fit. And what I mean by that is I would sometimes go to a conference and find out how are people submitting themselves to be a speaker, or how are they submitting a poster presentation. And then I would just make my case and apply as much as I could. You know, certain things I'd have to fill in not applicable, or, you know, I'm not representing a company, I don't have a product, you know, certain things you just have to write those off. And then, but at least you're probably talking to the right person, or that person is going to see your application and say, this isn't me, this has got to go to our patient advocacy team. But at least that gets you in the door and gets the conversation started. And I did sort of face exactly that challenge. We went into these conferences, and a lot of them, I don't think EveryLife and Global Genes would be included, but some of the other ones are a bit unwelcoming to the patient voice, whether they intend to be or not, just because they may be too expensive or too difficult to attend, or they haven't realized that anecdotal evidence is valuable evidence. You know, we're not the doctor's lab report, but we're the lived experience. And I think luckily that tide has been changing. A lot of people will at least say they want to hear the patient voice. They don't necessarily make it easy enough. And so sometimes you have to bang down doors that aren't meant to be open.
So this question, I'm going to put this out to all of you. The question is about sort of the new voices. How is it that we bring people to the forefront who we're not already hearing from, the people that are really moving mountains, but they have low visibility and smaller budgets? How do you find them and make sure their stories are shared along with those wonderful stories we're already hearing? Just jump in if you have a good comment.
I'll go. I think again, you should surround yourself around the people who you can learn from and who are doing it. And I think you should befriend them. And I think you should set up a call with them, and maybe just kind of learn as you go. Also figuring out ways to get yourself out there on social media. It's tedious, it's not for everyone, but it's effective. So whether you want to commit to one platform or just kind of sprinkle it all throughout, I think that's important. You never know who's going to read it or who's going to hear it. Trying to guest on podcasts or blog forums or YouTube channels, really just putting yourself out there as much as possible, and trying to find the right people who can help facilitate like the next steps that you want.
Great.
And I can second that. I'm sorry. I can second what Effie said. A lot of everything that I've been doing pretty much is social media. I mean, just one day I went like crazy in LinkedIn, and with my personal profile, I just start sending requests left and right for different organizations and people that I knew were part of the rare disease or Duchenne or you know, part of the community. And then on Facebook, that's where I found pretty much all the families. And now I found that TikTok is one of those platforms that they're following. So now I'm a cool mom with a TikTok, and I create a TikTok too for the organization. Other thing is, I talk to everyone. I'm not good on camera, but when in person I am. Just yesterday I was in a gas station and I was texting, sitting on my car, and I saw a lady next to me. She was parked there for a little while, and then I saw her. She went in, and I saw she came back, but I pay attention to her sweater. It had it had the word reach organization on it, something like that. And then I saw on her card a lanyard with the same name. So I say, hey, ma'am, excuse me. I said, what do you do? And we started talking for more than an hour. And now she's gonna be helping us actually reaching out the community, because that's what they do. So yeah, just trying to reach people, connect, talk to others.
I love that you're a cool mom. And you are a cool mom. Effie, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm always trying to be a cool mom. I was also thinking my girlfriend Jill and I decided to think locally this year, and that had such an amazing effect. We had a huge party for Rare Disease Day out in a big park, and every local business in our town got involved. There was even like the mayor who went and picked up some of our swag and asked questions. We were in 3 newspapers, a magazine, and on a radio station just to get the message out. And we just received so much amazing support from just kind of going door to door. So that's also something to do, is get people who could see your face.
Mm-hmm. So this is, I guess, a Louisa question, but anybody who has an input is welcome to join in. Other than Spanish-speaking populations, I know that you said you're doing the best you can to meet that need right now, but there are other groups that are interested in reaching other smaller subsets and those that speak other languages. Do you have any suggestions on how a rare disease community can help meet the needs of those smaller, maybe different language speaking or even different geographic regions, or, underserved communities?
Well, actually, remember our mission and vision for our nonprofit is the immigrant Hispanic communities, but that doesn't stop on the Hispanic communities. We're immigrants, and immigrants come from all over the world, but we're focusing on the less fortunate, basically, people who is hard for them to find the information. I mean, a lot of people says you can Google it, but for some people it's not that easy. So we're trying to focus right now on the Hispanic community. Once we grow up, my idea is to expand to other languages. I partner up with actually another organization I didn't know. An uncle of mine has this school in Mexico for languages. So we partner up with him, and right now he's the one helping us with the translations. But the idea is to expand to other communities. We get a lot of people from India. Lately, I've seen a lot of people from East Asia, but I can't remember the name of the town in Asia, which has really surprised me. A lot of Native American people, even though they're Americans, they still underrepresented. So that's our goal, to help pretty much. We just want to help everyone, regardless,
Great. Any other comments, Daniel or Effie?
I think going back a question, somebody was saying how if you've done all you can to get your message out, how do you sort of get it up the media ladder a little bit? And obviously, getting on the Today Show or something is kind of difficult, but getting on, let's say, Effie's podcast is not that difficult. She may be booked out a few months, but she's always looking for more people to talk to. And same with the version we do on the Disorder channel. We're always looking for our guests. And I guess that's something, if you're not a media creator type person, you could think of it like there is, whatever your schedule is, you have a weekly podcast, you have a monthly podcast, you're going to need a guest a month, right? So these people, the two disabled dudes, whoever, they're all looking for guests, two rare mama bears. Follow the podcast, get to know the podcast, or whatever it is. Maybe it's a blog and they want to take a guest blogger, or it's somebody like Courageous Parents Network and they take guest blog submissions. I should have mentioned that in the blog answer question. But this tends to be, the rare space tends to be more open to and more accepting of the new people, the less experienced storytellers, because we all started there. None of us are that far away from no one will listen to my story, that I hope none of us have lost any sympathy for the person that is only beginning to start to tell their story.
This is a nuts and bolts question, but I think it's an important one. Do you need consent forms when you're hosting people who are speaking on your podcast or in a conference or whatever? And do you know where you can find a template for that?
I use them just for my own safety. Some of my background is in production as well, in marketing, and we go a lot about using any type of form to protect us, because you never know, unfortunately. I do use it. I have a lot of videos that I haven't released, but I have them. I mean, if anyone needs a template, I'm willing to share. Just email me, Luis@theakarifoundation.org, and then just change your logo, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Okay, next question is low budget. What would you suggest for people just starting out with not a whole lot of funding for doing this? What are the best low budget options?
Get 2 jobs like mine, like me. I mean, I don't know, from bake sales to raffles to all kind of stuff, beg for money on the corner, a lot of Facebook fundraisers, but that's it.
Are there ways to get your message out that are pretty low budget? Maybe some of the things that you've already mentioned, including going on other people's podcasts, or submitting your videos to Daniel, or what other things cost almost nothing but still reach a pretty good audience?
I think social media, blogging,
Mm-hmm.
those things cost you almost nothing to, or sometimes exactly nothing to do other than your time. Where you get into the expenses, if you wanted to host a podcast, then there's a little bit of expense. If you wanted to produce a video, but as you suggested, Pam, if you want to be a guest on those things, that doesn't cost you anything. So I think, and one can lead to the other, right? If you're a frequent blog poster or you're a frequent podcast guest, then maybe that's your stepping stone to, okay, now I'm ready to start my own podcast. And yes, that's going to have a budget, and can I afford that budget? But yeah, it's hopefully not prohibitive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we have time for one last question, and there's one specifically for you, Luisa, but it may apply to others as well. When you partner, you mentioned partnering up. Do you have to pay these companies or partners to work with you? And how do you manage the negotiations and the payment around that?
I didn't understand the question. Like, if I pay someone or they pay me to be partners?
Yeah, exactly.
No, unless they mention a sponsorship. Like, we just got a small sponsorship from PTC Therapeutics, but actually no, for my rare disease as well. But unless I mean, I don't charge. I don't charge. And every little funding that it comes it goes directly to our organization. But it's, that's why I got a professional to do that, because I'm very bad asking for money. So, but no, I mean, unless they offer it, I'll take it. But now I guess with our grant writer will be a lot different.
Okay, great, thank you. I think we're ready to move on to our next section. Is that right?
Yep, thank you so much, Pam, Daniel, Effie, and Luisa for answering those questions. If we were unable to answer your question during this session, we will do our best to try to get back to you either within the Q&A box or via email after the webinar. Next up from the EveryLife team, we have Rare Disease Legislative Advocate, State Advocacy Fellow, Swapna Kakani, who will talk about how to make your voice heard and make a difference. Welcome, Swapna.
Thank you, Kanoi. Next slide, please. Welcome, everybody. My name is Swapna, and I am the RDLA State Advocacy Fellow with the EveryLife Foundation for Rare Diseases. But first and foremost, I am a rare disease advocate myself. So about 31 years ago, I was actually born with a chronic GI rare disease called short bowel syndrome. I was not born with all of my small intestine. I was born with an intestinal birth defect, and anatomically and physiologically, I did not have proper intestine, so I was not able to rely on the food we all enjoy to sustain. So from birth, I have been dependent on nutrition, both from a feeding tube in my stomach, as well as a permanent IV in my chest. I actually just unhooked during the break. I received the IV nutrition every day. I've received it for the last 28 years and counting, and I received the nutrition through a feeding tube for my first 20 years of life. In my 31 years, I've been in and out of the hospital. Growing up, it was very frequent to be in the hospital at least once a year with IV line infections, multiple surgeries, as well as frequent doctor's visits. In the last 30 years, I've had 65 surgeries, including a small intestine organ transplant almost 7 years ago. I can't believe it's even been that long. And in this journey, as you can imagine, my care got pretty complicated as I got older. And my family and myself, we had to put the care in our own hands, as you can relate, living with a rare disease. And we Googled, we researched, where are the subspecialists that are treating the complications I was living with? We traveled to snow country 12 hours away. We traveled to the beach 12 hours south, determined to find the doctors that I needed. And I learned in this journey, in the many surgeries I have and the maintenance care that I have to go through day in and day out, that the patient voice was not being heard. Instead, it was a duty of the individual intimately affected by rare disease to speak up, to share their experiences, and to make their voice heard. But as a child, all I wanted to be was normal, just like my peers. I didn't know anyone else with a backpack, a nutritional backpack, a feeding tube, an IV in my area, in my state. So all I knew was what my peers' lives were like, and I wanted to be just like them. So I shared little to nothing about my journey. And however, at the age of 21, I was scared to go into the operating room just one more time, not knowing what the end result could be. So at the last minute, night before the surgery, I started a blog to share updates with my friends and family. And that blog changed everything. It was my first event of bravery to share my story. I took a leap of faith. From there, the blog became a website. The website became social media, and I ended up started posting where I was going, what I was doing, what the doctor's appointments were like. And then I started attending events. Next slide. And my advocacy journey started to begin. I attended an event and I was asked to do a state house legislative advocacy event in Alabama, where I was born and raised. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was determined to make some kind of impact, but really do something outside of the day in and day out of my disease journey. So I used what I have, the tools that I had, which were social media and email. We posted about the event. We sent emails about the event. And we said, come to the State House and share your story with legislators. They need to hear what we live with. The picture on the left are the 2 legislators that attended. Little did I know that one of the legislators was very important and was going to be our champion for future legislation moving forward. The bottom picture are the attendees that came. These were champions of different rare diseases in our state. I had never met them before. I learned about rare diseases I had never known about, but I immediately connected with them. And I said, I cannot walk away from them not doing something. We have to take action. What that is, I'm not sure just yet, but I will not give up. Which then takes us to the next step in the journey on the right, which is the following year, where we did even more. We got a proclamation, we even met the governor, and we created profiles. We thought, from a legislator perspective, what do they want to see? They want to put a face to the story, and they want to know what our challenges are living with a rare disease in Alabama. So that's what we summarized. Next slide. Then it even grew the following year. I said, let's pass legislation, but more so I learned from other states and other advocates what they're doing. And I learned that from social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And we created a law to name Rare Disease Day in Alabama from here on out, as well as Rare Disease Awareness Month from here on out, and did a public signing with the governor, with other stakeholders and organizations in the state that it was imperative to work together. So this represents researchers, patients, caregivers, legislators, and physicians. We then started meeting with key legislators. The top right is the Speaker of the House, but at the state level. We then partnered with those organizations I mentioned and did a state symposium. These events are now annual events in Alabama. Next slide. But in this process, we also connected to national organizations, just like EveryLife. Before I became in the position I am today, I was an advocate, just like you listening in to the Rare on the Road event. And I attended with my buddy, legislative advocacy buddy in Alabama, Kristen. We then went to Rare Disease Week just last year and met with our legislators and had a really great time and can't believe it's already a year ago. Next slide, please. So from that journey, I thought we need to put some structure to what we're doing in Alabama. And because I realized where you live really matters. It really dictates the type of care you're offered, the quality of care you receive, and the access to resources you have available to you. And all of that plays a role in policy. So I started Alabama Rare, which is an organization to unite the state around the rare disease population. It connects left with right, but it celebrates what we do have, the tools we do have to work with, and the organizations that are in the state. And we collaborate to affect the change. So we pass state policy and we host annual statewide advocacy events as well as symposiums. Next slide. So with that background, I want to give you an agenda of what I'll be talking about. So one, I want to explain to you what Rare Disease Legislative Advocates is, RDLA for short. You'll start to learn a couple acronyms in this presentation. What the power of advocacy can really do and the impact you can have by advocating. But where do you start? And then ways to get more involved. Next slide. So RDLA stands for Rare Disease Legislative Advocates, and it really serves as a clearinghouse and a hub, an advocacy center for the rare disease community. We have resources and tools to help you take action, and all events and resources are free and always available to all members of the rare disease community. The resources and tools educate advocates on how legislation and policy can impact the availability and access to treatments, both locally as well as nationally, and provide tools on understanding that. Next slide. A goal for us is to connect every member of Congress with a rare disease advocate. So imagine if every member who is elected to represent us knows a family who's intimately affected by rare disease. That can change how they look at a legislation. More so, not be a paper or bullet points or what they have to say yes or no to, but rather this is the difference between saving somebody's life, changing their quality of life for someone they personally know. Next slide. So to explain the power of advocacy, I put a couple scenarios to show what some families and individuals can go through living with a rare disease in the country. So comment in the chat which scenarios you can relate to personally, one or multiple. So scenario one is a family has a child with a rare disease, but lives in a state without newborn screening for their disease. Unfortunately, that is common, and we'll talk about policy that can impact that. Scenario two is a couple is paying out of pocket every month for their child's medical nutrition formula, but because their insurance does not cover it. That's also is a common story. An advocate lives every day with a rare disease with no FDA-approved treatment. As you may know, and being a member of the rare disease community, 93 to 95% of rare diseases do not have an FDA-approved treatment. We are constantly working on policy to change that. Scenario four, an adult continues to go from doctor to doctor around the country searching for a diagnosis for their daily symptoms. The diagnosis journey in the rare and undiagnosed community can be 7 to 10 years on average. Scenario five, a young adult is working with her or his clinical team to understand their chronic rare disease and their life as an adult gaining independence. It's constantly this balance between health goals and life goals and communicating that to our clinicians. Next slide. I am here to tell you that there is an impact to grassroots advocacy. The speakers ahead of me have really explained the different ways of grassroots advocacy and how they've become the advocates they are today because of their grassroots efforts. So I'm here to tell you and remind you that you also have the power to affect change. We have the responsibility and we have the privilege to be the educator, the trainer, the resource. A lot of what advocacy is education. Again, teaching another person, a legislator, a stakeholder, a decision maker, what it's like to live with rare disease, what we deal with, what are the issues in the rare disease community, so that they can get it, they can have that empathy. You are the greatest person to do that. You know your story best. And every effort to advocate matters. Sending an email, posting on social media, the big moments as well as the small moments. And there's a role for every advocate. We talk a lot about speaking up, being on video, being out there, but there's also very many roles behind the scenes for everything we do. Next slide. Why advocate for policy? Policy impacts the healthcare journey that we live day in and day out for you and your loved ones affected by rare disease. On the left are the 5 policy priorities, for the EveryLife Foundation. Brenda mentioned them at the beginning of the webinar. Here they are again. And so our policy is always affecting these priorities. We want to change these priorities. I promise you, you do not need an advanced degree to be a rare disease advocate. Your story is the experience that no one else has. That makes you unique. No one can take that from you. You, with your story, can influence legislation and policy. And thus, they want to hear from you. Legislators want to hear from you. Remember, they are elected to work for you. You are their constituent. You are the expert. And education, education, education. Next slide. But how do you do it? How do you advocate for policy? It really starts with creating relationships with both your local and federal legislators. You share your story connected to a policy ask. Don't feel afraid to ask questions. You engage in resourceful organizations such as the EveryLife Foundation, Global Genes. We're here to support you on every step of the way of your journey. I've found supporting others with their policy goals can also help and teach you a lot. And then activate your own network. People always say, I don't have a network, it's your network. I promise you, I felt the same. Who's in my network? But unless you try, you will never know who is out there ready to rally for you. Next slide. As I said, the core of it is relationships. So this is a favorite graph of ours where we show how important relationships are. As you'll see, the bar with the most positive influence is in-person visits from constituents. Now with COVID, that's a little different, but the point is meeting with legislators, even if that's a Zoom, a phone call, or hopefully soon in person. Next slide. So we have a poll for you. Do you know who your state and federal legislators are? A, yes, I know both my state and federal legislators. B, yes, I know only my, federal legislators. Ooh, yes, I know my state legislators, or no, but I want to. And E, no, I don't think knowing my legislators is for me. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I'm liking how the responses are coming. Okay, so about 56%, a little over half, know both state and federal legislators. That's really awesome. That's unusual. Oh, they're getting better as I keep on talking. Okay, next slide. So where to start? Where do we start? One, it's deciding who to engage with. There's so many people you can engage with from the federal side to the local side. So one, it's deciding who do I need to talk to, and we are here to help you. We want to let you know that with most, if not all of these individuals, they have staffers. And you may just be disappointed to meet with a staffer, but let me tell you, the staffer is almost the most important person to meet with, because especially for federal legislators, they are the one to work for the legislator and meet with all the advocates that ask for meetings. They summarize the meetings, they do the research on the policy, and then relay back to the legislator. And then the next decision to make is when to engage. Anytime and all the time. It's never not a good opportunity to build a relationship with your legislators. And there's opportunities to schedule meetings both locally as well as in DC, or even phone calls and Zoom meetings given the time. Next slide. There's so many different ways to engage. You find the tactic that works best for you. We want legislative advocacy to be something you appreciate and is friendly for you and not an uphill battle. So sometimes emails work better for someone versus in-person meetings, or writing op-eds or posting on social media. Make it personal, whatever you do. Next slide. We encourage you, when you decide who to engage with, to know that person as much as you can. Just like you would when you would meet with anyone else, you want to know who the other person is at the table. You can research your decision maker, your legislator. You can visit their website. All federal legislators have a website, and most state legislators do as well. And most of them, given the time, the 21st century, most are on social media. You can find from both their sources, what are they interested in? What legislation have they supported? What is their stance on recent news events that have happened? You can also see on congress.gov, a great resource for all legislation at the federal level. And then you may find something common with them. We recently found out that an Alabama legislator, legislators in our country have children with chronic diseases, and they're interested in some policy for that reason. Or you may find that you both support the same baseball team, or you went to high school together. Whatever you have common with them, it's always nice to state. We also always like to say rare disease is not Democratic or Republican, it's bipartisan, and we're the rare party. Next slide. Now that you've decided you want to have a meeting, how do you schedule a meeting? Well, we have a link on our website to take action. And then on that link, you click find officials, type in your zip code to get your address so that we can match you to your correct legislator. And then when you click the legislator's name, you can see all their contact information. When you call their office, always remind them that who you are and that you're their constituent. Again, they're there to work for you, help you. And then you can say how you'd like to schedule a meeting with the person that works specifically in healthcare, and they can help you on how best to do that. Next slide. When meeting with your legislators, there's 3 parts to it: introductions, sharing your story, and making the ask. Next slide. So introductions and sharing your story is showing how you're the expert in your rare disease journey. A lot of times the meetings can be just 15 to 20 minutes. So practicing your story in a 2 to 5 minute pitch is ideal. When making the ask, there's 3 ingredients. 1, what is the problem you're facing as an advocate or as a person with a rare disease or one who cares for a loved one with a rare disease? What's the solution to the problem if you know that? Is there policy that's being proposed to address the problem? And then what's the call to action? What would you want them to do for you? What are you asking and why is it important for you? It can just be simply, I'm here to introduce myself. I've done that multiple times. Hi, I've been in the area. I wanted to schedule a meeting to introduce myself and start the relationship. That's fine, but it's great to state that. Maybe you need help with the legislator for them to help introduce a bill. Or there's a bill already and you want their support, which is called co-sponsorship. Or maybe there's a bill out there you do not want them to support and you have a good reason for it. Next slide. So a little more specifics on the ask. The goal of a meeting with an ask is to get the member of Congress to take action on that request. For example, if the goal is to get a legislator to co-sponsor a bill, which means support a bill that you also support, then that's the goal. So the most important thing is to make sure you clearly articulate that goal and you're specific. We'll talk about some policy and give you an example of how when you talk about policy, legislators like to know the bill number. And then finally, there's something called leave behind material, which is detailing what you said in your meeting in the ask, but on paper. It's a great way to put you and your ask on the front burner. Remember, they are getting asks from so many advocates across the country and especially in their state. So making sure that you have the details and the leave behind to make you stay on top of their mind is important. Next slide. Another way to keep you on their mind is using social media. We've talked about it a lot as a great advocacy tool. It's also a great advocacy tool in legislative advocacy. It's a way to make them aware of the problems you face. I mentioned how most of them are on social media. You can tag them. It's also a perfect way to thank them for the actions they're taking, such as co-sponsorship or meeting with you. This is a perfect example of a post where the advocate is thanking Senator Gardner for meeting with them. And of course, tagging them in photos that they're in, they always like that. Next slide. Follow up is as important as the meeting. As I said, they're getting a lot of asks. So how do you stay on the front burner of their mind? Sending an email afterwards to thank them, to say, to repeat the ask, to offer to be the resource. Remember, the resource, the trainer, the educator. And it's a perfect way to keep the relationship alive. Remember, legislators are elected for a number of years, and you want to have that same relationship or even grow the relationship from year 1 to year 4, if applicable. And then they're reelected so they can be in office for multiple decades. If you have a local event coming up, invite them. They love to get involved if their schedule allows it. And then, of course, using social media. And then they sometimes have local events or town halls through phone, Zoom, etc. Next slide. So these are another ways to keep the relationship alive. Again, signing up for their newsletters, finding different opportunities to engage with them, calling members when relevant legislation is coming up. And again, always thanking them when appropriate and when they are taking action on your requests, and staying in touch. Next slide. So what are some key takeaways? Another poll to get you involved and see if you are staying awake. A, create relationships. B, rare diseases are not a partisan issue. Meeting with your legislators in different forms. Saying thank you to your legislators, or all of the above. Okay, that's great. Great, great. Next slide. The answer is all of the above. Okay, so in the few minutes that I have left, I want to talk about the EveryLife legislative priorities that we are working on right now, and that you can take action and use the tips and tools that we just gave you to take action and contact your legislator about. So one is the burden study. This is called the National Economic Burden, the National Economic Burden of Rare Disease Study. The EveryLife Foundation with various partners commissioned this study and just released the data during Rare Disease Week. And it was the most comprehensive study we've ever had of the total economic burden of living with rare diseases in 1 year. So as someone living with rare disease, we know that there are a lot of challenges associated with finances and how much impact we have with medical costs and non-medical costs, but there was no compilation of that data. So we surveyed the community and we looked at direct, indirect, non-medical and uncovered healthcare costs for the individuals that responded to the survey. And now the results are quite astonishing, and this is a powerful tool for policy discussions moving forward. I have a slide to show you a brief summary of the results right after. So yeah, I'll go there in just a second. So then the STAT Act is another policy priority, and it stands for Speeding Therapy Access Today Act, and it does have bill numbers. It has been introduced both on the House of Representatives side and the Senate side. And at the core of it, it creates an FDA Center of Excellence for Rare Diseases. And so by doing that, we're expanding existing authority of FDA by creating the Center of Excellence. We're optimizing interagency coordination. And then we're also targeting impactful policy reforms at the FDA and advancing science-based regulatory policies by creating a rare disease and condition advisory committee. we're through the policy, we're also supporting accelerated rare disease therapy development. And then, as you know, as important as getting drugs, it is also accessing the drugs. And so it is also facilitating access to FDA-approved therapies. All the details are at statact.org. Next slide, please. And so this is a quick summary of the burden study. Again, everything will be at burdenstudy.org, and we encourage you to please visit the website. We've worked hard on the site to make it very accessible and great information. But we surveyed a little over 1,300 members of the community. That's how many answered the survey, and that represented 379 rare diseases. And we estimated a $966 billion economic impact, economic burden, so nearly 1 trillion and this came from 2019. And so that is estimating a prevalence of 15.5 million people with rare diseases. This is not generalizable to all rare diseases, because this is a snapshot of some rare diseases that we were able to cover out of the 7,000. So definitely further research is needed to understand the prevalence and economic burden of all rare diseases. So this is just the beginning. Again, burdenstudy.org. Next slide. I'm going to bring it back to the STAT Act. As I said, it has been introduced in both the House and the Senate side. And so we're just encouraging you to please contact your legislators on both the House of Representatives side and the Senate side for them to co-sponsor the STAT Act. And then finally, newborn screening. So newborn screening is a unique program that has both federal legislation as well as state legislation. Newborn screening is one of the most historic public health programs we have in this country. So we have a bill at the federal level, Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act. Again, it's both on the House side and the Senate side. And it reauthorizes the federal committee for newborn screening to be reauthorized to work. And then it also directs funding to the states for newborn screening, as well as future studies. And again, all the details are in the bill and on our website. And then at the state level, it's a whole nother advocacy effort to add diseases to rare diseases that are approved at the federal level to our state newborn screening panels. And so, but at EveryLife Foundation, we are working on legislation in 3 states this year, Ohio, North Carolina, and Georgia, to add, to improve the legislation so that the states will have alignment to the federal panels, funding, as well as a timeline to add the diseases now and moving forward. Next slide, please. So ways to get more involved is our website, rareadvocates.org. We have events all the time. Rare on the Road, of course. We have monthly webinars, we have newsletters, we have an online calendar, and of course, social media are great ways to stay in touch. Next slide. And I can't finish a presentation without letting you know about our state advocacy resources. We have a new state advocacy hub at stateadvocacy.org, where you can see what's going on in your state and have action tools, legislative action tools respective to state advocacy. Next slide. And finally, join us. These are different ways you can follow us on social media as well as our emails. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swapna. Next up, I would like to introduce the Honorable Luke Messer, former member of the U.S. House of Representatives representing Indiana's 6th Congressional District. Mr. Messer was a member of the bipartisan, bicameral Rare Disease Congressional Caucus, created to promote awareness of rare disease issues. Thank you, Mr. Messer, for joining us today to share information about policy issues that impact the rare disease community.
Thank you. I'm excited to, I guess, have I not started my video? All right, now I have started my video. Is that right?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. Hey, thanks. Excited to have the opportunity to be here. This is actually a little different angle in my house. We probably all in the world of COVID have developed our sort of go-to spots for Zoom and all of that, but we've got a little work going on in my house. So instead of being in my office, I'm kind of sitting in a different place. So this is my first view of this backdrop, and it looks like it'll work. So we'll go with that. I'm excited, and Fegri's, appreciates the longstanding relationship we've had with the Rare Disease Coalition, and I'm excited to have a chance to speak to this group. I am a former member of Congress. I've now been with Fegri. This is going on my third year. Kind of interesting, in these worlds of Zoom and the like, we don't always get to interact with each other that much, but my predecessor in Congress was a guy named Mike Pence. His brother Greg was my successor 6 years later after I was there. And, when you come to these events and you speak as a member or a former member, you never quite know exactly what you're going to get. And so I recall when I was running in the primary, Mike Pence and I actually became friends running against each other in a primary, and a brave soul in Mike Pence's hometown in Columbus, Indiana, was hosting an event for me. And so I showed up to this event, and, it was just me and the other person. And about a half hour passed, and just me and the other person. And finally, about an hour into this, I turned to the person that was hosting me and said, we don't have much of a crowd here, and he said, no, sir. And I said, well, it's just me and you. And he said, well, yes, sir. And I said, well, did you tell him I was coming? And he said, no, sir, but we're going to find out who did. And so I look at this list, and believe it or not, if you see all these participants, there's like 200 participants. This is really awesome. I'm sure they didn't tell you I was coming, but I'm honored to get a chance to be kind of a small part of the presentation today. Swapna's presentation, the bit I saw on the back half of it was great. Frankly, some of the things I'm going to talk to you about, you can almost just drop the mic and say, hey, do what Swapna said. But I'll give you, from a member's perspective, some of those same skills and techniques in dealing with individual members of Congress. And obviously it's a little bit different when we're not on Capitol Hill and we're going and making these in-office visits. But I think a lot of the very same principles apply, particularly as, we've all kind of gotten used to a year into this, the world of Zoom and the like. I think I'll start by just talking a little bit about, like, what is the environment like in Washington? How different is it than what you're seeing on TV? Or, if you tune in CNN, you might have one view of the world. If you tune in Fox, you might have a slightly different view of the world, if NBC and the like. But I would say this, most of what you hear from a reporting perspective about Washington is that it's really highly partisan and divided. And I would tell you, as a former member of Congress with a lot of friends that are there, that in real life, Congress is really highly partisan and charged and divided. And in some ways, the sort of personal side of what's happened with COVID has made that, if anything, more so, because a lot of individual members aren't back here as much, although in the last few months they have been, and they're having all the experiences as human beings that you would be having. But I think the good news for the advocates on this phone call today is that while the broader environment in Washington is partisan, our issues are not. And frankly, we ought to have opportunities to maybe be a beacon of light, be an issue with the STAT Act and others, be an issue where people could come together, because as everybody on this call knows, these issues that we're here to fight for really ought not be partisan at all. With that, and I'm hoping maybe to even get you guys back on schedule a little bit, but I'm glad to answer some questions. But what I want to do is kind of go through 8 or 10 principles that I think are helpful. I think it probably adds up to 10 when you approach this process of advocacy with other members, and then take some questions if anybody, offers those. My first would be this, a couple somewhat personal ones, but is despite what you may have read in the media or saw on, the internet, most members of Congress are decent human beings that are trying to make a difference. Of course, there's a lot of partisanship. Of course, people come at government with different philosophies. And as I've mentioned to you before, all of that is very real. But in all my time in Congress, I never met one person that I thought was trying to do terrible things for our country. I met plenty of people who I might disagree with on issues, and I thought they had ideas that would be bad for our country. But I think it's important to start from the opening premise that this person you're meeting with, their staff, their team, they want to make a difference, and we're bringing them an opportunity to make a difference. And when you approach it from that perspective, I think you have a better opportunity for finding common ground. Second, they are human. And I do think one of the most important elements to remember is all the sort of general niceties and world of politeness that you would use everywhere else. It's important to use here. I mean, ask somebody how they're doing. I can tell you they're almost certainly incredibly busy. And what's happening in the world of Zoom is it used to be they might scurry from 15-minute to 15-minute meeting, and have the sort of physical constraints of that. What's happening now is they might have back Zoom meetings where people are every 20 minutes on the next call, changing from environment to ag policy, to rare diseases, to tax policy, to trade policy and the like. And so it never hurts to stop and say, how are you doing? Are you feeling well? We really appreciate this time. What I often describe as the cardboard cutout effect. If you've ever seen one of those big life-size images of Donald Trump or Obama or now Joe, where you can go put your arm around the cardboard cutout. If we're not careful, it's easy sometimes to see our individual members of Congress or the staff that they work with in that way. And I think it's good to stop and be human for a minute. I think it's important. And again, I think so much of this, I think maybe Swapna covered in parts of her presentation, but stats and facts are important, but stories are the most powerful weapon we have in persuading and bringing information that sticks with people. All of you have a story to tell about how a rare disease has impacted you or your family, a loved one, somebody you care about. And I think the ability to provide facts and figures, but also provide stories that help people make an emotional connection, it will help them in explaining why this should happen. And it's just quite a bit more powerful. Where possible, local stories are even better. Each member of Congress represents about 435, one 435th of the country. And so they like to frame stories around the people where they live. Now, that's not always possible for us. In-state stories matter too, and other stories. I mean, but I think the more localized, the better. The second thing, or another thing I would mention, let's I guess be number 4. And I did hear Swapna talk about this. I think you want to be very specific in your ask. It's helpful when you come in, if you have somebody and you get them interested, that you're say, hey, be a sponsor of the STACK, for example, or if we have varying coalitions that we want them to be a part of, caucuses that we would like for them to join if they're not already a member. All of those specific asks is an opportunity to make a connection and an opportunity to for them to show that they're on board, not just tell you that they're on board. And but again, you'd be surprised when you have meetings with folks and they come in and it's a really wonderful meeting and you're really excited to have the chance to talk to them. And then you leave the meeting and you think, gosh, I'm not even really sure what I'm supposed to do to help. So making sure you get that specific ask in, I think, is really important. It's probably a little less applicable in the virtual world that we live in today. But I often say to people as they come to Capitol Hill, don't be deceived by a unique meeting location or the youth of the person that you're meeting with. You know, when you're on Capitol Hill, you might get a meeting that's people walking by in the hallway, or you meet some staffer that's got a little desk that's tucked over in the corner, or you listen to them and you think, well, how can they really know anything about this topic? You know, well, often that young staffer may be the decision maker in their office about whether or not they jump on board with an issue like this. They're certainly the person who can make the recommendation. And so even if it seems like that this person is somebody that, you know, is young, or the location makes you think, well, gosh, I don't really understand. Or maybe in today's Zoom world, you've got a picture of the phone and it looks like they're out walking around the park. It can be the meeting that makes the difference in whether we get a co-sponsor, and enough co-sponsors gets us to the point where we get a bill that starts to move. So don't be deceived by location or by youth. You know, I think this is important, and these two go together. One, I think it's a mistake to assume that the person you're talking to knows much about your issue at all. And I hate to say this, but sometimes in Washington, people will, they'll tell you they understand something when maybe they even really don't. So you might say, well, you probably understand this, or you know, you may already know, I don't want to repeat it. And they say, oh yeah, I understand. I still think, and this is where the second half comes, in a concise way, be able to summarize our point of view and what our bill does. And so I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, I think another mistake is we come in and we love, you know, our issue so much, and we just talk. And in the end, you know, we filled 20 minutes and it felt good, but ultimately maybe the individual we're talking to didn't really get that much out of it. So I'm not suggesting they say, well, I understand it, that we go on for 15 minutes, but I think it's important to come in a sort of very concise way, explain what we're about, explain, you know, for example, the STAT Act, and be able to sort of make the case concisely before moving on and giving them time to ask questions. You know, one of my favorite stories regarding this is, it's an old story by Harry Truman. He was asked once after he was president if he could give a speech, and he said, you know, if you want a half-hour speech, I can be there in 2 weeks. If you want a 10-minute speech, it'll take me about a month. But if I can talk for an hour, I'll be there tomorrow, right? And I do think it's important as we go in and, you know, speak to members that we've spent time beforehand in our own mind, putting together those concise stories and those concise explanations for folks that are really busy and want to help us, but they've got a whole lot going on as well. I thought something else that Swapna said that was really smart is, when we have these meetings, let's view them not as an opportunity to have a one-shot case to make and our point of view, then kind of on with the rest of life. Each one of these circumstances is an opportunity to build a relationship, to make a friend in that office. You never know today, even if somebody's the junior LA in their office, they could be the LD, the legislative director in the office within a few months. And they could end up being on the right committee and a real, you know, policy leader over time. You know, somebody who is a member today that maybe isn't on the committee of direct jurisdiction could be on that committee in 2 or 3 years. And I think the opportunities to, you know, follow up with emails, a text if you get a cell phone number, social media opportunities as well, to become almost a little bit of an expert for these folks, where they have a question about this later and you're the one that followed up and connected in a human way with them. And all of a sudden, you know, you become almost the policy expert on rare diseases for this congressional office. I think that's very possible if you follow through and don't just treat this as a one-time stop. And then just 2 other thoughts, and then hopefully I'll open it up for a few questions and talk about what you guys are interested in. I'm here. I'm not ever a son, but I've been trying to read comments on the chat side, and I haven't seen anything yet that I have to directly respond to. But I think, don't be frustrated if the person who's there now isn't there in another 6 months. I mean, we do have to take our opportunity now and then continue to reload and build new relationships. That's the nature of the process. And I think the last thing I would just say is have fun. I mean, this is a great country. It's amazing that we have an opportunity to petition our leaders. It's amazing that we have an opportunity to make a difference. And it's not something to be taken for granted. And if, it's easy when you're in these circumstances to be all business because it's important, and to maybe even be a little bit nervous. But the reality is that just by being your own self and telling your own amazing story, you have an opportunity not only to make a difference for your family, but for, thousands and thousands of other families who can be impacted by many of these illnesses. So, I think I'll kind of leave it at that for any questions that folks might have. And then I do have kind of one big, broad thought, one kind of fun story. But, I see Elisa said this has been helpful. Do we have some questions here that we ought to try to answer? So should I just read them, or how should we handle them?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Messer, for giving us that advice. We're going to have our Q&A moderator, Pam, come on, and she's going to ask you some questions from the audience. And she's also going to ask some questions of Swapna as well at this time.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So let's get started. This is a question actually for Mr. Messer, and it is, you've heard a lot of stories from people. We all heard how powerful stories can be. Which have impressed you, and what kind of testimony have you found the most powerful?
I think the folks that impressed me the most were people that just were very human. So like, I think in the end, if people understand what you're going through, then I think persuading them on the policy becomes much, much easier. And I mean, I can give you an example outside of rare diseases, but multiple years ago when all the tragedies in Syria happened, the biggest thing that got me on board to help there, a number of Syrian physicians who were Syrian American physicians from my district who came to my district and told me the story of what was happening there. Now, obviously none of my own constituents were in Syria, right? But here were constituents from my district who were telling me that story, right? And they were, of course, it was tears in their eyes and what happened. I think there's no logic to it beyond just be human and real. And then after that, they of course made proposals about what I should do to help. Then you follow up with, okay, and joining the STAT Act will help with this for these reasons, right? So that's, I guess, the best advice I would give there.
So this is a bit related. It's a storytelling question, but it gets to the practical aspect of first of all, if you have a full-time job and a family, what can you do to advocate and tell your story? How do you find time for that?
Yeah, well, one, it's not easy, and I think you're right. I mean, what you guys tasked me with doing was telling you the perspective of the staffer or the member, right? And the perspective of the staffer and the member is they're drinking out of a fire hose and they're having, meetings every 15, 20 minutes. And so I do think you're right. I mean, probably the other thing I ought to add that's more practical to your last question is, to the extent you can be practiced and really think about, okay, how do I tell this story in a minute and a half, not 5 minutes, right? Often you'll be more powerful, right? If you think about it, if nobody likes to hear somebody just talk and talk, even if they're talking about something that's very heartwarming. So anyway, I think take comfort in the fact that it doesn't have to be 5 or 10 minutes. It can be relatively short. And then secondly, I think take comfort in the fact that, as I said at the beginning, most of these members, they want to make a difference. That's why they're here. And so when you come to them, it's not a burden. for you to come to them and tell them your story. It's frankly an opportunity for them to help and make a difference. A world that, you know, listen, no much, they're not any more fun with all this relationship than you are. You know what I mean? And so an opportunity to make a difference on something that matters.
So, and Swapna, maybe you have something to add to that. And also a second part of that question is, what if you want to maintain anonymity, especially if you have a young child and you're not sure you want to influence their entire future with, you know, telling that story?
Well, with the, how do you manage this with a lot of other things going on, which is the norm of our lives these days, and definitely when you have a loved one with a rare disease, chronic disease. And so I completely agree with Representative Messer, where you are actually even a better advocate when you can be concise. And it's always the famous quote, if I only had time to be short. and that's actually the same tool and tip for social media. On some of the social media platforms, being concise and short can be better. And so one tip is also multitasking. I mean, after this event, I'm going to be really honest. I have to go get labs drawn. I mean, this is the real life of what we deal with. But when we have the passion, I really promise you that you find the way to take the time to do it, even if it's a quick email where no one's asking for extreme formality. I think we trip on ourselves when we think about it way too much and then don't do anything because we stumble or fear that we're not being perfect, but rather being more honest and just real. As he was saying, the real stories is where the most impact is. And that does take time to be comfortable with that because it requires a little more rawness. The other question about not being completely visible, and I really respect that, and that's a conversation we are having internally more and more. And I said there's a role for every advocate, and I think one is I've seen people have different usernames or different names for the purpose of when they are wanting to be public, or if comfortable doing email and blurring out faces is okay. We want people to feel comfortable, never forced to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, and I was sitting here, saw another comment. I think kind of building on what Swapna said. And remember, right, not everybody can write a 3-page essay, but even one email can make a difference, right? Like we all beating ourselves up for the things we can't do. Let's do what we can do and make a difference in that way and feel good about it. And I think, Pam, I would have a mix of a response to the question about anonymity and would add a couple thoughts to it. One, this is a human personal process, and it's difficult to be as strong an advocate as you can be and stay anonymous. And yet I think that's certainly a legitimate enough concern. And in my experience, if you expressly say to a member of Congress or to their team, listen, I want to talk to you about this and tell you my story, but I won't be able to be the person that testifies in a public hearing. I'm not going to send out a letter to the editor that tells everybody my story, but I want you to know my story. I've seen that violated. Again, I think you want to expressly tell people that, and ask that be honored.
Thank you. And this is very closely related when you mentioned emails. First of all, if you don't hear anything back, how frequently should you follow up? And second, how should you maintain a conversation once you start speaking with your member of Congress? How do you keep that conversation going?
You want to go, Swapna, or you want me to go?
I'll let you go first.
Okay. Well, the first thing I think is that as long as you're polite, you can't be too persistent. Okay. So like what's not okay is to just yell at them or say you didn't answer my last 3 calls. But what is fine is to every time say, oh, by the way, well, I mean, of course you're so busy. Don't worry about that. But I still just wanted to make sure we had a chance to connect. Right. So be very persistent, but then just always be polite. And then the second thing is I really think it's important to think of this as every other human relationship you have in your life, right? So, you may need to talk to your neighbor about the fact that they won't mow the lawn, but it's helpful if you know their kids' names and you're able to sort of like talk to them about other things, right? And so in the same way here, I mean, if you can find a friend, like somebody who you remember their name, or maybe you remember when they went to college or what state they're from or whatever, and you can sort of make that connection and then follow up, they won't be bothered by you calling because they're just hearing from their friend and they're responding back on something that they're excited about.
Yeah, can I take a page from him and say, do what Representative Messer said? I like what he said. And the only thing I can add is it's okay if there's not an immediate response. That should not stop you from keeping on going. I think our core characteristic is perseverance, and it's amazing what perseverance can do, especially in legislative advocacy. It does unfortunately take some of that perseverance. So oftentimes bills will expire in one session and then have to start all over again in another session. And so then it requires the same song and dance sometimes, and you have to feel that excitement just the same way you did when we first introduced the bill, and the story needs to be told. But when that win does come and the policy is passed, it is pretty awesome. And we don't define success just when a policy is passed. That can't be our metric. That can't. It's more of, that's why I say every effort for advocacy truly matters.
Yeah, and I just, to not be a Pollyanna, I would also say, it's like your neighbors in that way too, right? You can show kindness to every neighbor. They don't all respond exactly the same, right? Some people are different people, but in general, people respond to kindness with kindness.
Thank you. Thank you. Kanoi, I know that we are a little bit over. Do we have time for more questions, or should we?
Yeah, so we are a little bit over, but what we can do is we can try our best to get back to any questions that weren't answered, either email after the event, or we can type it into the Q&A box now and hopefully get you guys those answers before this webinar ends. But I do want to thank you both, Swapna and Mr. Messer, for your time here today, for answering those questions. This is really informative. And thank you again for your time.
I think great. Thank you. Are you going to play that guitar during a break?
No, we actually had Timothy, our next speaker. He played the saxophone during one of our breaks, so I can't beat that.
Everybody have a good day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you again, both. All right, now I would like to welcome back our last speaker of the day, Timothy Harmon, who will tell you a bit more about how you can map out the next steps in your rare disease journey. At 17 years old, Timothy has persevered through misdiagnosis, multiple absences in school due to sickness, and being a caretaker for his mother, who is also a rare disease patient. Set to graduate high school this June with honors, Timothy serves as a young adult representative for the Rare Disease Legislative Advocates and has attended multiple lobbying events to ensure other rare disease patients receive the treatments they deserve. Please welcome Timothy.
Hi, my name is Timothy. I'm a senior at Lexington High School, and I'm a member of the Young Adults Representative RDLA, or YAR. If you've heard the squeaky Alto saxophone at the first rest stop, that was me. Today, I wanted to share a little bit more of my story with you and how advocacy has really helped me in my journey, followed by some next steps for you to take the advocacy journey. Next slide, please. I have a rare disease called cyclical vomiting syndrome, also known as CVS, not the pharmacy. I get that a lot, but it's not the pharmacy. It is a rare chronic illness that consists of episodes lasting from a day to multiple weeks of nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, migraines, headaches. Many of the triggers of CVS are stress, anxiety, barometric pressure change. It is silly, but barometric pressure change sent me to the ER last Thursday because I was constantly vomiting. I was diagnosed by first year of high school in Wisconsin, due to that being the best specialist for the condition. My CVS diagnosis was a very bumpy road. I went through many tests, but it was much quicker than my mom that has the same disorder. During her diagnosis journey, they took out many organs because they couldn't figure out what it was. When she was finally diagnosed, her medical records was as thick as the Harry Potter books combined. Me and my mom play the double role because when she is sick, I help her out, and when I am sick, she helps me out. To treat my CVS, I take many medications. Most of the medications are used to prevent me from going into an episode because of the many triggers. If you look at the screen, there is a device that I put on my ear, and it was an 8-week trial that placed a neurostimulator, and it put needles into my ear. It was almost like acupuncture needles, and they sent charges into my spinal column since it is a brain and gut disorder, and it really helped a lot. Next slide, please. The only good part about having a rare disorder is being an advocate. My first year of being diagnosed with CVS, my mom and I decided to go to Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill and Rare across America to speak to our senators. It was amazing to meet so many different people with different diseases, and I learned so much. I've done Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill for 2 years and Rare Across America once. I also decided to join YAR to meet young adults around my age with rare diseases. Overall, these 2 events and YAR have brought me out of my shell and have made me an advocate. Becoming an advocate is one of the best things you can do for your rare disease. You can not only get your voice out there so legislators can do what they want, but you can also meet other advocates and become a great big family. Next slide, please. We're going to do a quick poll with the question, have you ever met a legislator? So I do see a lot of people saying yes, but for those of you who have never met with a legislator, next slide, please. Or those of you who are veterans to meeting with members of Congress, I want to next share with you 2 of the opportunities that RDLA provides throughout the year to advocates who are interested in meeting with their elected officials and getting their voices heard. Rare Across America and Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill, both events are free and open to anyone in the rare disease community, patients, caregivers, family members, and other stakeholders. All are welcome. Next slide, please. Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill brings together rare disease community members from across the country to be educated on federal legislative issues, meet other advocates, and share their unique stories with legislators. In February 2020, we had 900 rare disease advocates join us in DC and over 390 different meetings with members of Congress. These Hill meetings are just one of the events that take place throughout the entire week, and this year, RDLA is hosting Rare Disease Week in July. During the event, RDLA also offers a caucus briefing, a documentary screening, the Rare Artist Reception, a young adult meetup, and a legislative conference to help you prepare for meeting and network with other rare disease advocates in your state. For more information about the event, go to rareadvocates.org/RDW. Next slide, please. Rare Across America has a chance to make an impact on federal and state policies from close to your home. This is another opportunity to build relationship with your local legislator throughout the year. This event usually takes place during July or August during the congressional summer recess. RDLA moved Rare Across America this week to the end of February because of COVID. Advocates united from across the country with over 360 meetings, taking Zoom meetings, phone calls from their living rooms, cars, porch decks, anywhere they could find reception. Now that is dedication. Stay tuned for when RDLA hosts Rare Across America in 2022. Next slide, please. If you are a young adult, I invite you to check out the Young Adult Representative RDLA or YAR. This is a group of highly motivated 16 to 30-year-olds from the rare disease community. The main purpose of YAR is to instill confidence in the next generation of rare disease advocates by providing skill building opportunities throughout the year. For example, I'm a part of the Speakers Bureau in YAR, and that is what brought me to present today. We meet monthly to discuss upcoming opportunities and check in with one another. We have our own activities during Rare Disease Week, and we have plenty of skill building offerings throughout the year, like the Summer Series and the YAR Leadership Academy. For more information, head to hearusyar.org. Next slide, please. We're going to do another poll that's popping up, and it's what kind of art do you enjoy? Do you enjoy painting, photography, graphic design, storyteller, or any other? So a lot of y'all picked painting and storytelling, which I think I love painting as well. So sometimes the advocacy is by the way of the road less traveled. Are you an artist trying to tap into your inner advocacy self? The EveryLife Foundation offers the Rare Artist Program for those of you who are interested in learning how to utilize your artwork and getting your voice heard and expressing your rare disease in an art form. Next slide, please. The Rare Artist Contest provides an opportunity for advocates to tell stories through their artwork. This is another way for you to take your next step into your rare disease journey. Rare Artists is a celebration of the talents of the rare disease community. Anybody involved in the ages from 4 and up can enter into the contest. Awardees receive cash prizes and an opportunity to come to DC during Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill to share their artwork. The next contest opens on June 1st and closes for submission on July 16, 2021. For more information, please go to rareartist.org. Next slide, please. There's an upcoming event called Rare Drug Development Symposium. Join the 2-day virtual event from June 10th to 11th, 2021, with an optional pre-conference workshop on June 9th. Here we will discuss the landscape of rare drug development, interact with experts, patients, and advocates in the field, and ultimately discover your role in advancing drug therapies and educating yourself on the complex world of rare disease drug development. Next slide, please. Another event coming up is the Rare Patients Advocacy Summit. Save the date, which is September 28 to 29, 2021, and more information will be coming soon. Next slide, please. Are you new to the Global Genes or want to learn how to deepen an existing partnership? Take a tour with some of the Global Genes team members and they'll walk you through who they are, what they do, and how they can partner with you to elevate your rare disease organization. Next slide, please. If you want to join Global Genes, the new Rare portal, go to rarecommunity.org and click on Login Register to join today. This will let you be able to network your peers worldwide, find and share resources, and also collaborate and initiate discussions with other rare disease stakeholders. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Timothy. And from all of us here today, from the EveryLife Foundation and Global Genes, we want to thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded and we will send you instructions for access via email when it becomes available. And for those residing in Nevada, Florida, and Illinois, keep an eye out for more information next week about our upcoming Rare on the Road virtual state-specific training and networking events. Join us again this May for robust conversations with other local rare disease community members about what it means to be an advocate, with an opportunity to practice your rare story and a chance to hear about relevant updates regarding COVID-19 vaccine distribution in your state. Residency within the states is required to participate. And finally, you will be sent via email a survey about your experience here today. We would greatly appreciate your honest feedback to help make sure we are providing all of you and other advocates with the most relevant training and information to help you on your rare journey. If you complete the survey, you will be entered into a drawing to receive a $250 Amazon gift card as a thank you, and the winner will be notified by email. Once again, thank you all so much for joining us here today, and we look forward to seeing you on the road in the future. Bye-bye.